homosexuality is consistently characterized from the Old Testament to the New as a sin and is nowhere ever condoned. Now, I've heard the arguments over the years. Some will say that Jesus never made reference to homosexuality as being sinful. And yet, when you read the Bible, Luke chapter 17, verses 28 through 30, Jesus said, "As it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so will it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed." Lot was in Sodom as a man who sat at the gate as a judge. Lot was delivered from Sodom when God judged the city. You see this in the book of Genesis. It's very clear there. The men of the city, when they saw two angels enter into Lot's house for sanctuary, the men of the city came and began to press on the house, knocked on the door, and said, "Bring out the men you have with you that we may know them." When you open up the original language, Hebrew there, the word "know" there speaks of carnal relations. What the men of the city were saying is, we want to take these men out and have homosexual relationships with them. And God destroyed the cities because of that, as well as other sins. But in Jude, in the book of Jude, verse 7, it says, "Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire." You see that this particular sin is strictly forbidden and was cause for judgment in the time of Sodom, and Jesus refers to it when he speaks relating to the signs of his last days and his soon appearing. Jesus spoke concerning it. And so, what we have today is a very strong homosexual lobby that attempts to legitimize this sin. H.R. 1592, called the Local Law Enforcement Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2007, has been labeled the most dangerous bill in the United States. It may use the power and authority of the federal government to stifle religious speech. It has been called a smokescreen for stifling dissent on important issues of national debate such as sexual orientation, gender identity, and religion. On the National Day of Prayer, May 3rd, 2007, this bill passed in the House of Representatives by roll call vote. The totals were 273 ayes and 180 nays, with 16 present but not voting. It is now pending to be presented to the Senate. And the bill will work towards stifling any debate on the issue of homosexuality and homosexual marriage. The questions have been asked: how will it be possible to have public debate on abortion, same-sex marriage, or publicly funded sex change operations without the con side breaking the law? What about articles and books published in other states but available in California, whose writers take positions that make feminists, homosexual activists, or abortion advocates feel intimidated? Are these to be banned in California? There was a pastor in Sweden a few years ago who read the book of Romans chapter 1, where it speaks about forbidding homosexuality, and he was put in prison. If these kinds of bills are passed and become law, then a pastor like me, standing up in a pulpit like this, could be put in jail for what is called hate speech. That's what takes place, guys. You have to be aware of that. And Paul, speaking here, said very clearly that the law was against these things. Why? Because these people need to know that it's wrong, but also the gospel comes in order that they know they can be set free. God can set free the homosexual in the way that he sets free anybody else who's entangled in sin. I had a man who approached me years ago. I won't go into the full story, but he approached me years ago and spoke to me and wanted me to minister to him about something, and it turns out that he was practicing homosexuality. Make a very long story short, he had gotten arrested for a public act of indecency, asked me to go with him to go before the judge in a local court because he was being, charged there, and he was going to have to deal with it in court. And I remember him coming into my office and saying, "David, can you go with me?" Our church was brand new at the time. I couldn't make an excuse of being too busy, to be honest with you. And so he said, "Will you go with me to court?" And I remember looking at him, and I was a young man at that time. I was 30 years old. I'm looking at that guy, and he's a young man. And I'm thinking, if I go with you into court, and I'm sitting there and they read the charge, they're going to think I'm your boyfriend. And I have to tell you, I was not open to that. I have to tell you, I was not open to that. I was saying, "Oh, no. And the Lord spoke to my heart, and he said, "I identified with you. Why are you afraid to identify with him?" And I said, man, Lord, give me an assistant pastor. I'll send him. So I went. I went with him to court. I sat next to him there, and, you know, he was charged and all of that. And then I took him to my office afterwards, and we spoke. And make a very long story short, I led him to the Lord. And a couple of years later, performed his wedding. And a couple of years later, I dedicated one of his children. And a year later, I dedicated the second child. And the guy got saved. He got washed. He got cleansed. Jesus Christ can save you. He can forgive you. He can wash you. He can cleanse you. He can transform you. And he does that because that's what the gospel of Jesus Christ is intended to do. That's how it works, you see. The law identifies what's wrong with us, but gives us a remedy. And if we don't understand that, then we're going to be afraid. We're going to be afraid to not say things that are politically correct. We're going to be afraid of people coming to church and getting upset because they actually are discovered for being what they are. But the Bible says, I can set you free. That's what Jesus Christ came to do, you see. And we should never shun doing that. And so he says, you need to know that the law is good if it's used lawfully. He goes on and finally he says this. It relates to kidnappers as well as liars. A kidnapper is a slave trader as well as a simple kidnapper of children. It breaks the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. Liars is a man who is false, who perjures, he swears falsely, breaking the 9th commandment. So he gives to us basically some laws that speak concerning social life. But he goes on and he says, and if there's any other thing that's contrary to sound doctrine, according to the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which was committed to my trust. Not only does this deal with those things that have been explicitly written, but in overall conduct. Moral behavior is a result of sound doctrine. It's a reflection of the same. And the gospel has been committed, he says to me. This glorious gospel of the blessed God was committed to my trust. That word committed is used in the New Testament of the conviction and trust to which a man is impelled by a certain inner and higher prerogative and law of the soul. The gospel is intended to create a society that lives at peace with its God and one another, and it is from God. That's why Paul says, on the contrary, we speak as men approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We are not trying to please men, but God who tests our hearts. Timothy, I commanded you to remain there in Ephesus. I ordered you to do that. I besought you and charged them that they teach no other doctrine. Why? Because God's gospel sets sinners free. And when you apologize for the truth, you leave them in bondage. Timothy, false teachers are entering into the church, denying the Lord that bought them. They're going to bring upon themselves swift destruction. Do not fall into that trap. Teach the truth so that man might be set free.